Uh, Welcome to the first of a series of podcasts that we're doing from the Patterson studio. My name is Robert Patterson. I'm the primary teacher at the Patterson studio and have been for the last 43 years. And this series of conversations will include many people from many different aspects of the theatrical profession to talk about the craft of acting and how can it sustain itself. So welcome. The first person I'm going to speak to is a person who finished studying with me in the late 80s. He's worked as an actor, a director, a producer, and also recently adapted Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass for an outdoor theater in Pennsylvania that he worked on in consort with another student of mine that had much to do with the process of the way they've been taught to work. So the first thing his name's Dan Amenda. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And very, very kind of you to come and do this.
I'm very glad to be here.
Okay. So maybe the first thing we could talk about is how the process of where he came from, how he arrived in New York and found this studio, and what he found when he got there, and what the influences of that training have been on him.
Well, I think I grew up in a industrial town called Rockford, Illinois, which was pretty desperate and desolate in the late 70s, early 80s, and I knew that I had to get out. And I'd always thought and dreamt about coming to New York City and becoming an actor, and that was what I was going to do. But I first went to Florida, and I actually auditioned for a theater company there, and I was cast in a role, Sam Feinschreiber in Awake and Sing. And
well, the reason you're giggling is because Sanford Meisner played that.
That's correct. Yeah. So I did that role, and at the time it was all Shakespeare and Company from Lenox, Massachusetts, who were running the theater. So I went up to Lenox and spent time with them and did some work up there, and then I came down to New York, and I had an epiphany that I didn't know what I was doing, and I really wanted to seek out a teacher who had clarity, who had vision, who was going to be honest, who was going to be straight with me. I had tried a little college. I felt imprisoned somewhat by college and wasn't really getting fed in the way that I'd hoped in terms of the craft of acting. And I just knew something was off without knowing what. And I ran into a couple of students who were studying with you, and we were at a bar after hours in New York. They were attractive, and so I was discussing with them what I was looking for. And one of them looked at the other and said, "Should we tell him?" And she said, "Why not?" So they told me about your studio. I went to meet you at an interview. I think it was a Monday or a Tuesday night. It was, I think it was this summer, and I went through the interview process with you, and you asked me at the end of the interview if I thought I could do this, and I remember kind of blurting out, "I think I can," and you said, "Yeah, I think you can too." So I said very little in the interview. I did a lot of listening. And I didn't really know what it was you were speaking about in complete terms. I just knew that it was something that I didn't know.
Excuse me.
And you fit all of the criteria that I was looking for. I thought you were straight, that you knew something I didn't know, that you had a process to teach, which was, even though I personally wasn't clear, was very, I understood that the process was very clear. I understood the process was very clear. And so that struck me as very interesting. And then I went to see, you invited me before I started there to come and see the final scenes. And
I did.
Yeah, I saw class finish before I started studying.
Mm-hmm.
And I was bowled over because I'd never seen anything like it. And I didn't know, I knew there was an energy that was kind of circulating in my blood that was scared. I was scared and excited at the same time. So I'd realized I'd found something that was really new and unique, and to me, and I think really it is, and I feel like that's one thing about having studied at the studio. Now that I look back on it, is that it is new and unique, and it continues to be. The process continues to be a very feeding, mysterious, human, deeply essential process that bypasses one's personality and one's own limitations of how they think, and brings out elements of themselves that they didn't know existed to meet the demands of a particular role. Really, it's its purpose, practical purpose. But I could go on and on about how
Please
it
do,
affects.
because you know, it's fascinating for me to listen to this, because I don't think of what I teach that way. I think of what I teach as my job and my work.
Yeah, and I think that's very clear when you study there, that the practicalities, the practical way you approach it. I remember one class, we were sitting there and you said, what am I doing? How am I teaching you? And in terms of the whole class. And I said, well, you're doing the work while you teach it.
It's amazing what that'll allow you to get away with. That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is
Yeah,
true.
it is true, and it was, and I was fascinated by that. I really had, that was an
Do you want me to clarify that now with
That'd be
28
great.
years
Yeah,
later?
that'd be great to hear.
Well,
that.
it's
Yeah.
so important in the basis of the process for this not to become intellectual, that it becomes totally organic.
Right.
So the actor understands that what makes the Kirov especially, but also at one time the Bolshoi as well, so unique in the way those dancers are trained, is because they have each dance from their own sense of individuality. Okay?
Yeah.
So that when you talk about the expansiveness of technique, you shouldn't see technique. I never even refer to it as technique.
Right.
I refer to it as a way of working.
Right.
So in the basic work, it's very important that everyone learning that, especially considering many people have habits from their prior training, or habits that come from, and we'll probably get into this later in this two-part conversation, having gone to a theater department to be trained.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what that has done to change the profession.
Right.
But, so it's very important that each student encounter each element of the process organically through their own instinctual response to what's being taught. So that right off the bat, they don't do it as I'm saying it. They understand it as they find it and go through it.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, if you watch Fred Astaire or Gene Kelly, they're both incredibly proficient at what they do. And totally different, and the way they dance is an extension of their temperament.
Right. That's true.
And so that's kind of what I'm talking.
Yeah, and I think, I think the struggle coming in there was, as you say, it was to teach, hitting the student at the instinctual level and not through the intellect. And, as a 20-something-year-old who fancied himself, a thinker, which, I kind of look back and laugh at now. It was very difficult. And then to bypass all of that, to shut that out. And it's not really about shutting it out. It's about being in the moment. It's about living. It's about letting what is there be there, instead of trying to create something that is aesthetic. I mean, I think one of the things that has always stuck with me in terms of some of the things you've said, and there are many, but one of my favorites is "the mind's eye can only supply a cliche," and I think
that's a direct quote.
Yeah, I think that's
very
important for an artist and a craftsman to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Yeats said that art is but a vision of reality.
Right. Right.
So it's well, enough said for me. I talk for a living.
Well,
so
I think I again, just going back to my experience of finding the studio, and I was from Rockford, Illinois. I hadn't really done much. I hadn't really experienced much. My father had died about a year and a half prior. I was really just trying to find my own way at that point, and fumbling around, and knowing, and I think this is correct, that college was not going to serve me in terms of the craft of acting. In terms, if I was going to be a scientist, it would serve me very well. But in terms of the craft of acting, I just knew it wasn't right for me. And I really, I was having these experiences of, over time through the studio, of really growing as a person and being pushed by you and your demand to not add to the ignorance of the profession, and to really begin to study all aspects of Dostoevsky, Turgenev, Chekhov, which I had done a little Chekhov, but not much. I mean, I was a really very ignorant man, and hadn't been inside a museum, an art museum. And I went to your urging, it was very clear. I went to the Metropolitan Art Museum, and I walked in, and I came up.
My urging?
Yes.
You mean my absolute demand?
Yeah, your absolute demand, yeah. Which was, I'm grateful to this day. Very grateful. Very grateful to you, because I think that...
That's very kind.
Well, it's absolutely changed my life. That day changed my life. And there were several days in the course of studying where I could point to and say, when I first saw a Bertolucci film, that day changed my life. When I went to the Vladimir Horowitz concert, that day changed my life.
That day changed everyone's life.
Yeah, I mean, there was just so many experiences like that, that you walked in prepared and gave us these things to do that were very selective and very specific to each and every student. This has a lot to do with kind of actor you are. This has a lot to do with the kind of actor you are. And speak to that specifically, and then to go and see that, and to realize, not intellectually. There was no intellectual realization. It was really an emotional and an instinctive cognition.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Did you instinctually understand, without having a full comprehension of it, that all those things you were being sent to do would eventually have to do with developing your resources to develop a role specifically through the selectivity of what you're doing, so that you would have enough resources to understand that process to the minutest detail? Did you somehow understand that?
I think I cognize that without, certainly not intellectually, but I cognize that. I think, I mean, going back to Rembrandt, right? I mean, that was a moment that I'll never forget. And so on that level, I was like, as a man, as a human being on the planet, was so grateful and so fed. But as an actor, understood that there's so much more that I don't know and that I need to know in order to really create, as you say, in a very specific way, recreate a role and meet the demands of what the playwright wrote to do. And that became really a new way of thinking about the craft of acting.
It's funny, I'm teaching he's not really too young. I mean, he's, I believe, in his early 30s, who has that appetite about him and understands what he's learning. Without knowing it, he understands that it's going somewhere. And he really walked in here with no prior dinner on his plate. He hadn't studied, he hadn't worked. He was a model, actually.
Right.
Kind of interesting guy to be a model. Just understood, and his appetite for it is immense. I plan to sit down with my current students and have a discussion with them on these programs, because it would be very interesting to hear what they're going through in learning it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you understand the other classes you had to take as being necessary to the craft?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think, again, this is something you said that I have never forgotten, that the real actor needs to be, have his externals, or the real actor has to be trained twice as...
10 times.
10 times as much as the false actor in their externals, so that they don't rely on them. They just come through what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
So they never have to. And I found that to be true. And I found that working with the different, I came out of Linkletter and then went into Robert Williams, and found the Robert Williams approach so much more practical in a certain way, in a very particular way. I mean, it was incredibly practical. It was really working on the voice, the diction, the ability to eliminate accents.
Yeah, it's funny you bring him up. I'm very grateful to the people who mentored me, and I've had some great people mentor me. Sanford Meisner, Martha Graham, Pearl Lang. But someone who I had a particular regard for and his ability to teach, who I think is just one of the greatest teachers I've ever encountered, was Robert Williams, and the sense of discipline that created the freedom for the student.
It's exactly, And I think, having the dance classes, I was going to, I think, June Lewis at the time.
Yeah.
Who was based in Graham.
She's a Graham protege.
Right. Yeah, it was fantastic. And to go there and was just, it was a great thing to do in the middle of the day. And it was a great reminder of where I was headed. And it was opening up the body so it could be free to really inculcate and not devour, but inculcate a role within myself without being, coming off as Midwestern. And a clod.
and yet at the same time, you'd want to divorce that.
Right.
Because if you listen to, if you watch Geraldine Page in Summer and Smoke, if you watch Geraldine Page in The Trip to Bountiful,
right.
or if you watch Geraldine Page in Sweet Bird of Youth,
Mm.
There's one common denominator.
That's Geraldine Page.
Right. The same as if you listen to Beethoven's Grosse Fugue, the Seventh Symphony, or his Third Piano Concerto, there's one common denominator. It's absolutely. That means that
Yeah.
if you listen to Masters of War, if you listen to Nettie Moore, or if you listen to Tweedledum and Tweedledee, this wonderful song he wrote, there's no question who it is.
Right.
Bob Dylan.
Right.
And
Yeah, and I think, you know, I've continued to work that way, and I think in the beginning of your class the struggle was I didn't know anything, and I certainly didn't know who I was, and I certainly didn't understand who I was as an actor. And those three things through the process of studying became clearer to me, and I think over time became clearer and clearer, not just through aging and getting perspective, but really from the practice of the work. You know, as to understand who you are as an actor and to work impulsively through the work that was taught, it's a constant surprise, and it's glorious fun. It's nothing more fun than doing the work and doing, you know, and then letting it all go and throwing it all away and getting up and basically bringing it back to its most simplest and basic form, so that there is no technique being shoved down someone's throat as great acting. It just isn't. It's just there.
and yet it's very specific.
It's incredibly specific.
Yeah. You know, it's funny you're bringing this up, because you bring to mind a fellow who studied with me very early on. He's passed away much too young. His name was David Haskell, and he was a pretty well-known actor. He worked a lot in the theater.
Yeah, I saw David.
And he worked a lot in film and did several TV series.
Very talented guy.
Yeah, very talented. And he was with a group of people who had come from Carnegie Tech, and he had this attitude. He was a little frustrating to work with at one time. And I finally said to him, well, why do you want to act? He said, because I love it. And I said, that is a damn good reason. So when people ask me what's kept me going for soon to be 44 years,
Right.
I'd say
It's a long
I
time.
love to teach.
Yeah.
And what makes that possible are people like you